Hi, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Live by Sounding Board. I am your host, Christine Tao. I'm the co founder and CEO at Sounding Board. We are a scalable, dynamic development platform providing coaching and mentoring solutions for some of the most amazing companies in the world. And part of that, I get to engage with some very amazing leadership and learning leaders. And so today I have Kate Shaw with me. Kate Shaw has led learning and development at some of the most iconic companies that we all use and have heard of, whether it be B&B, Apple, or Lucasfilm. And I'm super excited to have her on the show today. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, thank you. It's really nice to be here with you.
Great. Well, look, I want to first always start with the question that we always start with, which is to just learn a little bit more about you and to hear about your origin story.
Yeah, I love that you start with this question. I think I have a few origin stories, and I'll give you a little bit of a sense for what they are, because I think that there's a few parts of my upbringing that really ended up informing a lot about my career. I was born in Omaha, Nebraska, and I tend to gravitate towards Midwesterners in rooms. We somehow find each other, and I think that has informed just sort of a groundedness in me that I've found really helpful through the years. Um, I was the youngest of 5 kids, so I was
Wow.
always just desperate to keep up with my older siblings. So that sort of started in me, like, I think just a really early fondness for learning. I just wanted to learn more and more and more, and really got to explore a lot of the world through them and their eyes and their own pursuits. Um, I was the daughter of a naval commander who, while he was
Mm.
born in Geneva, Nebraska, and married my mom, who was also from Geneva, Nebraska, a small town of about 2,000 people. His naval career took my family all over the place. And so it
Mm.
infused in
Mhm.
all of us, I think, a real wanderlust that
Yeah.
made me really curious about the rest of the world. Um, and sadly, he died when I was 4.
Mm.
And it meant that my mom, who had been a stay-at-home mom for years, went to work for the very first time and had a really hard go. It was really, really tough for her. She raised 5 children on her own, sent us all to college. And I really had a front row seat to the hardship that that involved. She wasn't treated particularly well at work, despite being an incredible performer. And it really made an impression on me and got me really curious about the workplace and what it looks like for people to do their best in a workplace. Um, and so all of that ended up showing up somehow over the course of my career. I ended up pursuing a Fulbright scholarship in the Czech Republic, where I studied sex discrimination and Czech labor law. I ended up moving on to Lucasfilm because I'd grown up with just a tremendous love for the arts and for film, and I was especially obsessed with Star Wars.
Who isn't?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I might be nerdier than most, but um, and then that led me to Apple, and then ultimately to Airbnb, and all throughout, I've been working at this intersection of talent and culture in really creative and innovative environments. I've been incredibly lucky to work at the places where I've worked. And in hindsight, can see all the ways in which those aspects of my childhood really helped inform where I ended up and the work that I ended up doing.
That's incredible. I mean, I think about also just ourselves, right? I'm a mom as well, and I think you are as well.
I
And,
am.
and I know how challenging it is to be building and running my own career, and I have a very strong equal partner. And thinking about also just the difference generationally of what the workplace looks like now versus when your mom was doing that. I mean, one of the things you said that stuck out to me as well is that you seem to also know how she was treated, and oftentimes
Mm.
I remember as a kid, I didn't know even what my dad or did for work, and I'm sort of interested to know, like, how did you observe that, and how did you know that and the influence that it had on you?
Oh gosh. I only saw it in snippets.
Mm,
Um, but she would come home really frustrated and really sad
mm,
about her experience. She felt excluded a lot. She felt passed over a lot. Um, you know, she was the only woman in her office, and despite being really the top performer in her office, she was just not included in things. Um, all the men in her office would go off to lunch at Hooters and ask her
Yeah.
jokingly if she wanted to come. It was that kind of stuff. It's sort of, it's kind of hard to imagine, and it really impacted her.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think the last impression it really made on me is my mom passed away a number of years ago, but before she did, she was actually the recipient of a settlement in a class action lawsuit that where a number of women had just noted to the organization that she worked for that they had been not fairly paid, that they hadn't been promoted at the same rates as their male colleagues. And I will never forget the look on her face when she received that letter with the
Yeah.
award. It was real. It was a real victory.
Yeah, and to have that acknowledged and named, right? And to be compensated and, recognize that there was a
That's right.
real economic, um, impact of that, right, for those folks. And I really did see that thread, Kate, when I
Mm,
looked at how you even described the programs, and
mhm.
not just the programs that you led, but what you were trying to do in those programs in how you describe them online, that really did seem to have this lens of thinking deeply about inclusivity. Is there
Mhm.
anything that you can share about what that philosophy is or how that comes through into the work that you do?
Oh gosh. Well, I can speak mostly to Airbnb, given that that was really the last place where I was working full time. I would say, at the heart of Airbnb was this notion of belonging and a world where anyone could belong anywhere, and that really served as an inspiration for those of us who were in the employee experience team there. And we did a lot of research around it, not just externally in terms of what belonging meant to our hosts and guests, but also to our employees.
Mm,
Uh, and we engaged in some really deep thinking, deep research, internal study, partnerships, academic partnerships with Stanford, where we were really digging in deep to better understand what belonging looked like in the workplace, what it resulted in, what contributed to it, and both in terms of just sort of organizational structures and practices we might put in place, as well as learning offerings that we might put in place. Um, and it really was, I would say, a peak career moment in that I got to combine all sorts of my interests all in one place at one time. And belonging showed up as really a red thread through all of our practices. It was a shared commitment on the behalf of really our whole EX leadership group to not make diversity and belonging sort of a thing that we did on the side, but something that we really threaded through all of our practices and offerings so that we created a system more than a program.
and would you say that, you know I do feel that, because of Airbnb and
Hmm.
what it, so how many people have engaged with Airbnb as a consumer, there's a bit more out there in terms of the culture than, say, a typical company. But
Yeah.
would you say that that ability to really pull that red thread came from the top? Or would you say that that was something that your team had to actively develop and put out there and push through the
Mm.
lens you were bringing to the programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it did come from the top in that belonging was sort of always at the root of what Airbnb was about.
Yeah.
It's true that Airbnb is a platform that connects people, but the idea was always connecting people to some end, to creating real opportunities for people to connect throughout the world with strangers and turn strangers into friends. Um, and I myself have had just incredible connections I was staying with people as a guest or even hosting people as an Airbnb host. So it was always sort of at the heart of the mission of the company to
Mhm.
make the world a little bit smaller for all of us. The loneliness epidemic was a real uh, focus of conversation for the organization in terms of, what is this about? What is it caused by, how do we mitigate it? And again, help create more connection in the world so that people are sort of having these opportunities to connect with people they might not otherwise connect with. And that was always really at the heart of what the organization was trying to do.
Yeah. Well, if we could go a little bit deeper,
Yeah.
I'd love to sort of focus on one time because people often think of, we're talking about Airbnb, large successful company.
Hmm.
And one of the things that you did is you actually were there through the pandemic
Yeah.
where, you and I were talking. There was a moment people thought, oh my God, Airbnb could not make it, right?
Yeah.
The entire business was getting impacted by the pandemic. And I think you shared how you all the company generally
Hmm.
overall made a lot of big shifts, but that the learning strategy and what you were delivering also really shifted
Mm.
through this transition for the company and as it was changing. And I'd love for folks to be able to get a glimpse into like what does that mean? What did you change? What did you deliver? What was the impact of that?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I would say that, you know, it was just an incredibly scary time, right? Brian, I know, has talked about this. Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, has talked about this a fair amount in a number of different forums. But one of the things he talks about is the fact that 80% of the business just dropped out in the space of 6 weeks. We were very much at the tip of the spear for
Yeah.
COVID. Um, and it was an incredibly scary time. There are a lot of people saying in the press, like, maybe this is Airbnb's moment. It's not going to make it
Yeah.
through and be able to weather this kind of storm. And Brian is just incredible in a crisis. I mean, he really just buckled down and worked incredibly hard alongside the executives at Airbnb, certainly our employee experience team at Airbnb, just to weather that storm. I think what it meant initially for us was we just started putting out supports into the system immediately to help people
Mhm.
think about how they wanted to show up in that moment, how they might navigate that kind of uncertainty, how they might demonstrate compassion towards one another, and towards themselves in navigating that uncertainty. And initially that showed up as a lot of podcasts, conversations that we were
Mhm.
able to share with people just to kind of humanize that moment and connect us all in it. Our learning team also started setting up coaching circles where we just started pulling together groups of people and managers to help them think through how they might lead through a crisis like that. We started offering webinars out to people, really interactive, highly engaging webinars about, what does grief look like? What does it look like to actually navigate this together, whether we're leading teams or just leading ourselves. So we were really, we kind of abandoned all of the usual things and just met the moment as best as we could. Um, and while it was really hard work, it was really purposeful work. I know, even our team felt just incredibly exhausted by what we were doing and at the same time really fulfilled by it.
Yeah.
I think we were really proud to be of service at a time like that. At the time of the layoffs, it was really about helping prepare people to have leaders, to have compassionate one-on-one conversations with people who
Mhm.
were impacted. Brian has spoken a fair amount about the layoffs, and I would say Airbnb really tried to rewrite that playbook. I wish that that had paid forward more. I saw a lot of layoffs that came later that I think kind of happened based on an older playbook. And I think one of the things that Airbnb demonstrated is that while no company hopefully ever wants to impact that many people, there
Yeah.
is a way to do it that leaves them feeling intact and whole and appreciated for the
Yeah.
incredible people that they are. So I'm really, again, proud of how we showed up there. And then in the many weeks to follow, it was all about tending to the people who were still there, helping them regroup and rebuild, and rise to the occasion of Airbnb's business bouncing back. It was that group of people had to demonstrate a tremendous amount of resilience. as the organization really came back, the company came back, and we ultimately went public at the end of that same year. I mean, it was really a roller coaster. Uh, we thankfully not only weathered the storm, we really ended up thriving by the end of it.
I mean, that's such an incredible story, and I think one of the things that, many companies have been challenged with over the
Mm,
last few years, which has also been tumultuous in the sense of, macroeconomic conditions. And
yes.
oftentimes, for those of us in learning, we find that a pullback in investment happens when there is uncertainty around the business. And I
Hmm.
wonder if not only from that experience, but from others, if you have any advice around how you were able to either reprioritize or think about how to bring that element of learning back into
Mm,
being what was critical to help the business through those moments.
yeah, it's such a good question, and I absolutely see that pattern.
Yeah.
I think that, all the economic uncertainty that you sort of just mentioned, layoffs that have certainly hit tech, which is
Yeah.
the, part of the industry that I've worked in the most over the last several years. Um, it's put a tremendous amount of pressure in the system. And what we know about pressure is that what enables people to flail in the face of pressure or thrive in it is just simply how much support do they have.
Mm.
Um, it is it is, people can um, deliver a tremendous amount and deliver really high quality work in high pressure situations if they have support. And, I think that there is something about learning that is in and of itself a support system. It's what I see a lot of organizations doing right now is leaning into wellness offerings,
Mm.
into benefits, into learning sometimes as a benefit. And while there's no question that can help serve some people's needs, what it doesn't help them do is perform better necessarily or
Mm.
continue to grow their skills in a way that will really help them rise to the moment that they're in. So I
Mm.
oftentimes think of those kinds of solutions as, again, sometimes perfect, really important. There are some benefits that employees absolutely need in order to thrive. However, they are not the only solution. And what I think is really important when you're trying to help people perform is not lose sight of the fact that they also need to grow and that they also need to have support in order to perform.
I think that is such an incredible point, Kate, because you're right. Often when we think about just being in crisis, right, or
Mhm.
being under duress, we think about trying to maybe alleviate or remove the stress. But I
Mhm.
think your point is that's important because you don't want to be in, say, like a fight or flight, function. But at the same time, it's not actually helping that person to get beyond the stress
Yeah.
or the duress that they're under. How did you think about getting leaders engaged around that? Because the other piece of that often is people will say, but if I have all of these priorities, right? I've got 10x more work now than I did before. I don't have
Yeah.
time for this. Was
Yeah.
there anything that you learned about how to help people close that gap of thinking
Mm.
about time and importance and impact of that learning?
Yeah, I mean, this is always a really tricky conversation, right? Because this goes to the question of how much learning is just part of the culture of an organization and
Yeah.
how is it perceived. And one of the things that I think we really tried to demonstrate was that you know, learning is really ultimately about supporting the business. Learning for learning's sake is a nice to have. What's essential is learning that will actually support the business outcome that we're trying to drive.
Yeah.
So really trying to get clued into what are we really all trying to do here and how do we best support that?
Yeah.
And what is the culture that is going to support that business? What's the leadership going to look like that's going to support that business? And what does that mean in terms of how we all need to learn and grow? Um, it's true that learning can sometimes look like, a luxury,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's something that's a nice to have. when there are priorities everywhere we look that absolutely need to be done and people feel pressed for time.
Yeah.
I think that what they sometimes lose sight of is the fact that it's critical to slow down in order to speed up, that just going to the well and drawing upon a few new tools can make a massive difference in terms of how they show up in the work and get things done together. And I think, I'm mindful of the fact that we're here talking about, indirectly, but in a way talking about coaching.
Yeah.
There's always this balance between the collective and the individual when it comes to learning.
Yes.
We
Yes.
need programs that bring us together collectively so that we speak the same language, so that we are making connections across the business that we might not otherwise make, that we develop shared understanding and build in sort of social accountability about what it is we need to learn.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there are other parts of learning that are so deeply personal that we need to be met as individuals so that you can really think about, how does this all apply to me and how do I put this into practice?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I am struck now that I am outside of an organization and doing my own coaching work, um, at the resourcefulness that some people demonstrate to just decide, I'm going to go get this on my own. If my company isn't going to provide it, then I'm
Yeah.
just going to go seek this. I think what their companies miss in that moment is the fact that they have really eager learners on their hands, leaders who are desperate to grow, who would really welcome the support by the organizations they work for.
Yeah, and how incredible that could be for both if that could help that leader with their personal goals, but also bridge them into what makes them more impactful and higher performing in that organization,
That's right.
right? Because I think, we also fundamentally believe people want to be successful at work, right? And people know when they're not being successful at work, which is what might drive them to look for new skill sets or capabilities.
That's right.
But that ultimately nobody shows up to work saying like, "I really wanna do a bad job today."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if you can help unlock that in a way that motivates that learner or that employee and can motivate them to have more impact within the organization, it's a incredible multiplier.
Absolutely. I 100% believe that's true.
One question I had for you actually, is that you've operated in these large companies with very distinct cultures and values and even product sets and solutions.
Mhm.
And now, as you're outside organizations, is there anything that you've learned around how to drive that type of change being outside of an organization versus inside?
Oh my gosh, what an interesting question. I would say I'm learning about that very thing. I
Yeah.
think what I've noticed sometimes is that when you're inside an organization, the risk is very much that you're subject to it,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
That it starts to become difficult to really understand the waters that you're swimming in. And that was always the goal. Whenever I was in, whether I was at Airbnb or Apple, I was trying, and Apple really, my time there really helped inform this point of view, which is that really part of learning's role is to understand the culture so that people can better see the water they're swimming in, because it's
Mm,
very hard. So, how do you make subject object such that you can really start to see it in a different way? And better understand what it means in terms of the way that you need to build skills or mindsets in order to achieve in that culture. Um, I think that sometimes there's a luxury in being outside of an organization to say things and make observations about an organization that people within it struggle to say,
yeah.
or where they struggle to hear it, to be heard when raising those kinds of challenges or opportunities even. Um, so I would say that's one thing. Um, Another is, one of the things I certainly learned in doing research around internal or external coaching is that in environments that feel less safe, people are less trusting of internal coaching as a methodology
Yeah.
and want to seek external coaches. as a way of getting outside perspective, but also being guaranteed a certain amount of confidentiality or anonymity in what it is they share.
Mm.
That it's easier to build trust with someone on the outside. Um, those are a couple observations. It's such a good question, one I want to continue to puzzle on, because I've really, I'm still learning in this role, being
Yeah.
outside organizations and working across them.
One of the things we've learned, because at Sounding Board, our solution, we have, external coaching that we
Hmm.
power through technology, but we also have software that companies can use to be able to deploy their own coaches, and it could be
Uh-huh.
internal
Yeah.
coaches or
Yeah.
mentors.
Of course.
And so I ask this because we're learning as well, like, where
Yeah.
is it that organizations feel it's more appropriate to have somebody that might have richer context and
Yeah.
understanding of the culture and values? How does that show up in the types of programs and even levels within the organization where
Yeah.
that might make sense versus where does that external perspective really drive sometimes accelerated
Yeah.
development because it is an external relationship? So that's also been something that we've seen. And what I've seen so far, like what would I say I've learned is that you need both, right? Because
Yes.
there are times where that context awareness of what will be successful and is needed from the organization is critical.
Yes.
And then
I
there are
love
right
I
where it
love
yeah.
I love that you're doing that. I mean, it's very much it very much speaks to what we were working on when I was at Airbnb, which was what I was kind of referred to as a benevolent um, pyramid scheme, where really we were trying to expose higher level leaders to coaching through external coaches primarily, but we also built within them coaching skills, so that they could coach internally within the organization and really just pay that forward to others. And we also enabled people who were lower down the organization, but were really interested in developing those skills to develop them so that they could also be coaches to others. So it
Amazing.
was really about infusing the culture with coaching, with a spirit of coaching, such that people could get, to your point, the benefit of both worlds, and also develop connections inside the company that were really meaningful,
Yeah.
both for the recipients of that coaching as well as the providers. I mean, for some people, it was the best hours of their day.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of the leaders we work with actually eventually go on separately to
Hmm.
get their own coaching certifications because they've just experienced how powerful that is. And so there's an incredible amount of value for all of the people in that relationship, right?
Yes.
Both
Yeah.
the coach as well as the coachee. Well, with the last minute that we have, Kate, one of the things we always love to end with is just any advice that you might have for other L&D leaders out there. I think you've done a lot of really interesting and creative things.
Mm.
So, any learnings you can pass on?
Oh gosh, I would say one thing that is to the point of support. I think one of the things that oftentimes people in learning roles can suffer from is tending to everyone else's needs and sometimes losing sight of their own.
Mm,
So I guess one of the things that I would offer is to make sure just to fill your own cup, right? Just to make sure that you are really tending to yourself so that you can tend towards others. I think our discipline tends to attract, and I'll put myself in this bucket, people who love to help and be a support to others. And I think especially given these high pressure environments that so many of us find ourselves in today, we can find ourselves depleted.
yes.
And I would just encourage people to continue to nurture themselves so that they can continue to do the work that they love to do, which is to really help support the learning of others.
Well, we love that we do talk about putting your own oxygen mask first,
Mhm.
right? And that you're in the right place to help others when you yourself are well functioning. How can folks get in touch with you, Kate, if they are interested in engaging with you and learning more about what you do, whether it's coaching or consulting?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And thank you, Christine, for the
Yeah.
conversation today. It's so fun to be
Yeah.
in conversation with you.
Yeah.
I am on LinkedIn, Kate Shaw on LinkedIn, or I have a website, which is kateshaw.me. Somebody turned that into a verb, a friend of mine recently said, "Oh, wow, just Kate Shaw me." I'm
Oh,
still trying to figure out what to think of that. But yeah, kateshaw.me is my website, and I'm reachable there as well.
well, wonderful. Well, look, I loved learning everything about the programs you delivered and your background and your incredible origin story today. And I think I'm taking the same thing away that Kazuho did, which is that learning in itself is support. And I
Mm.
will leave everyone with that thought because I think it gives me a lot of ideas around continuing to think about where we can go.
Thank you, Christine. So nice to be with you.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Bye.